How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Killmark Collectors. Today, we're going to be talking about the balance changes put into the test server and some of the big winners and losers if these patches were to go live. Now, it's important to note that the test server has been up for almost 2 days at this point, and so these are still fairly preliminary, but just based off some testing that I've done, I think that this is going to hold up again in the current state if these go live. So, with that being said, let's undock and start talking about it. Alright, so with the test server, there's been a lot of action, particularly in Tama. If you haven't gotten into it, you should. It's a lot of fun, especially if you're able to get into those T10 battleships. There's a lot of just fun toys to play with. Obviously, with any test server or test environment, this is subject to change, but I'm going to just kind of give you the quick rundown of what I've seen, and based off of probably 4 or 5 hours of testing, what I would expect the meta to look like. Now, of course, I'm looking into my dent and cracked crystal ball, so what I say is probably not going to be accurate, but, you know, it's fun to hypothesize. With that being said, let's start with the number one winner for these balance updates, and that is going to be armor fleets. It was obvious from this patch with the way that they have recalculated the armor link, with the way that they have increased the amount of resists that you get out of those armor adaptives, that they were going to be putting a big focus on this. You add that together with the fact that you are seeing a pretty steep drop in shield field resists. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. You end up with the armor fleets being pretty beefy at this point. And that's not to say that I think armor is going to be the new meta, but it is going to give fleet commanders a lot more opportunity to experiment and play with some different things. I think in particular the fact that you could have, 10 battleships all together and just rolling with 2 or 3 different resists at, 60-70%, and then, pretty beefy tanks. I think that could be a really powerful combination. The other people I think are really going to benefit from this are actually going to be the solo ratters. The reason being that with if you're ratting solo, if you don't have a bubble or a guardian of any kind, then being able to actually have those resists up in the 60s and 70s by yourself makes it very viable. In my testing, I was actually able to just drop a prophecy into the middle of a T9 large, and it survived pretty well on just the armor. Now, obviously, in the real world, I wouldn't be going in at 0 with a drone ship, so you add that into the fact that, you're probably going to be at range. You're going to end up with some pretty beefy tanks on those ratting ships. So I think that's number 2 in terms of the big winner, not just the fleets, but then also the solo ratters. The third biggest winner in this is Jolly. Congratulations, Jolly. For those of you that aren't in the Silent Alliance, Jolly is one of our FCs. He loves the Oracle, probably a little bit too much to the point where it's kind of creepy. Now, the Oracle's already a great ship, and with the extra bonuses that they are getting from this buff, they are just that much more powerful. They're great sniper ships, and honestly, it might be something that I'm going to look at reskilling one of my alts into, because it's really powerful to be able to hit something from like 150 kilometers and still apply full DPS. So, yeah. Okay. Number 4, in terms of winners, are going to be just ratters in general in Null Space. With the burst command modules that are coming out, I think that you're going to see a lot of people, especially in the short term, looking to get their hands on those mods. It's going to be not nearly as profitable as some of the Inquisitors that are dropping CCC rigs or things like that, but I think these are going to be really sought after mods, especially in the short term, until people really kind of get the market saturated with these things. So it's going to open up more possibilities. It's going to make scouts worth doing again. So I think that those are really going to be some benefits. The last big winner here is going to be the industrial players themselves. Now, with the introduction of capital ships and the skills required to make them, I think that we are going to see a lot of people start hoarding minerals and the materials needed to actually build these things. This is good for indie players because there's already been a fairly big exodus of indie players thanks to the insurance system. Not going to get into that right now, but one way or another, there's just less indie players. It means there's less supply. I think people are going to start skilling into these capital ships anyways, potentially skilling out of some other ship types that may be built, And then between that and the materials that people are going to start hoarding to get to some of these big ships, I think you're going to see prices go up a good bit. That's going to be good for the industry players. It's going to be good for the economy. I don't know if it's going to be the long-term fix that we've really been hoping for industry. I think it's going to be more of a short-term once we, get some people ready and actually able to build these ships, because they are really expensive, and I don't know how many people are really going to be buying them in the quantities that would be needed to really stabilize the economy again. But it is something worth noting, and I think that it is a win, at least for those serious indie players that are able to mine just massive amounts of ore and able to eventually turn those into those big beefy ships. Now let's talk about some of the losers from this patch. First and foremost, the ones that are near and dear to my heart, the destroyers. The 15% buff, it was nice, I liked it. That being said, my algo still barely outruns a hurricane, which, yes, I know that there's some nuance there and all of that. Again, to me, it just doesn't feel like it's enough of a change, with that being really the only thing. This 5% buff in the tank is basically just keeping up with inflation at this point, when everything else, all weapon types are basically getting a 10 to 5% buff. You kind of have to have that regardless. So it just didn't feel like enough, and when you take into account the fact that they've lopped off some of the slots, I just don't like it. Not to say that I'm going to stop flying destroyers, but it's not the update that I was hoping for, if I'm being honest. Now, that being said, I will say that the T10 Tall War 2 Assault is fantastic. I do like that ship a lot. I wish that they would have made that the T8 version, because I think that would have been basically the ship that I was looking for at T8. To have it behind T10 and a lot of the skills that are required, it feels like a very expensive skill investment to get to the ship that is basically competing with a lot of the cruisers and stuff like that we've been dealing with anyways. Next up on the losers, unfortunately, we are probably not going to see much solo gate camping from now on. With the decrease in the number of high slots to interdictors, in my testing, I couldn't even break the tank on my stabber fleet issue. So if I'm being honest, I'm really not expecting much out of interdictors from now on. I think that they're still great ships. In a fleet, they are going to absolutely have a purpose, but you're just not going to see a lot of solo camps anymore if these changes go into effect. The next change that I was really kind of surprised about, didn't expect it or think it was needed, was the nerf to the Dominics. To me, this does feel a little ridiculous. We are basically talking about almost a 25% decrease in total DPS. I think I would have been less upset about this one if the T10 Dominix 2 wasn't giving exactly the same bonuses that the current Dominix does give. Either way, it's kind of frustrating to see a good ship, and one that I thought is worth the investment, especially if you're primarily ratting, be nerfed in such a way that it's kind of brought down to the point where I don't know why I would necessarily get a Dominix at this point when I can get a Tempest that basically does the same thing but gives me a lot more options in terms of being a brawler and some other things. Our second to last loser is going to be CEPTOR pilots, and if I'm being honest, I'm not really upset about this one. Now, CEPTORs did get a boost to DPS, however, the loss of their ability to use large group shields is going to be a game changer. The reason here is that with the current meta and the way that group shields are able to run on any ship, you can throw a group shield rep on there, and if you have 4 or 5 CEPTORs, you're almost unkillable. Between the speed and the shield boost that you're just constantly getting, if the pilots know what they're doing, you can pretty much be back up to full health instantly. With the loss of that, you are going to be relegated back to the speed aspect of things, and so I think this was an important balance change. It was one that I was really hoping to see in some form or faction. I don't know if they got it right in terms of the power grid requirement. That's a little bit remains to be seen, but I think it was a really a good change that needed to happen to make CEPTORs just a little bit less powerful. Kind of similar to the last one when we talked about the power grid, one of the things that I really enjoy in Eve Echoes is being able to go out and build some crazy stuff, make sacrifices, put different mods on, put oversized mods on, and be able to really make some changes and have some fun playing with things. But it makes it much more difficult, if not impossible, to make the determination of what I want to put on a ship and what I can't. it feels like they're taking a little bit of the decision making out of my hands. I like being able to say, you know what, if I want to throw a bunch of ancillary power grid rigs on so that I can fit one oversized mod, I don't see a problem with that. I don't feel like it's broken, and so I don't know what they were specifically trying to address here, but it just doesn't quite feel like it's the right change or a wanted change. I don't know. And then the last loser here, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the shield field mods. For the meta, it's been pretty much since launch, I think, that it's been bubble warfare, and so this change I think was needed. I'm going to be very curious to see if it's going to make the changes that they want. With the reduction from 56% to 41% for the mirror fields and the increase to damage, particularly in lasers, I think that you are going to see a lot less bubble warfare, or at least sustained bubble warfare, where you are going to have, 30, 45 minute engagements. I think Logi is again going to play a much bigger role because you're going to have less resistance, so you're going to be taking more damage. But either way, it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how that evolves. Along with that, not just big fleet battles, but also small fleet radders. I'm going to be very curious. I don't think you're going to be able to tank a T10 dead quite as easily, for example. You're going to be taking a good bit more damage, and so I think that you're going to really have to be relying on more Logi, on more people running group shields, things like that, if you want to keep doing that. And again, with some of the other changes so that you can't run group shields as easily, it's going to be really interesting to see how these all fit together and play together. But overall, I do think that this is going to be a good change for the meta and force players to kind of come up with some new strategies and not stay stagnant in the way that we have been basically since launch. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much for joining. I appreciate you listening to me rant and rave. Let me know in the comments down below if you think I missed anything or if you think I'm completely off base. I'd really enjoy just kind of talking about it and seeing what y'all think. So see you on the test servers for the next week or so. See you out in Null. And until next time, fly safe.